Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Eliminate Complexity when Exposing VSAM Files. My name is Martin McCall, the Product Evangelist at OpenLegacy, and I'm joined by Jorge Morlet, a software architect. He'll be giving a demo a little later. But first, some housekeeping. In the bottom right corner of the slide screen are two diagonal arrows. Please click on them to enlarge the screen. And please feel free to enter questions at any time by clicking on the questions button. We'll answer them at the end. And now on to our presentation. The first thing we want to talk about is what are the goals of VSAM access. Now, VSAM really is the file system for the mainframe. But we're here, let's talk specifically about VSAM as a file system and talk more about it as a database, because a lot of people have used VSAM files as sort of a database directly, and for a variety of reasons. Sometimes because it's speed, it's very direct access, it works well in the mainframe. The problem is that now, as everyone's gone to many more digital sources, they want easy and consistent ways to do on-demand API creation. On-demand really means when you need something, you have to go get it. And we're going to discuss a little bit about why that's important, but also why that's a challenge with VSAM. And one of the main reasons, it's just hard to deal with them outside the mainframe. VSAM files weren't designed to be dealt with outside of the mainframe. They're files, and the files work in certain ways, and that's just the nature of it. And we'll discuss what those challenges are in a couple slides. But the next thing people expect clean digital assets. If I'm working a digital side, I expect to get something, a microservice or a serverless function, something along those lines that's easy to actually access, and from there, you can actually just plug it into your system and have it work. I don't care that something's coming from the mainframe in that sense. I don't want to have to know anything specific in any particular way. But also I expect speed, both at design time, so I can do things on demand, and also at run time, so everything works very, very well. But some people have asked the question to me, like, why now? Why do we need VSAM access now? And it seems like it wasn't quite as important before, and it's always been pretty important. But and it's really being exacerbated by some of the different laws which have been passed, the CCPA laws and the GDPR laws. CCPA is a California law, and GDPR is actually the EU law. But there are a number of different places where that actually works. So these are just reasons why it gets exacerbated as we're working, and that's a very important thing to think about, why people are actually need it right now. So what are the actual challenges when we think about this? One big challenge is people need a deep knowledge of copybooks. And most data people don't think about things like Cobol copybooks when they're actually doing work. But because they're used to things like SQL and just getting direct access to data. Copybooks were always for either the Cobol programmers, but also for maybe people who are accessing business logic. Luckily, we have a lot of experience with that. But the biggest thing is you have to do a lot of different things. You have to be able to do VSAM requires parsing the offsets, looking through different offsets inside of the actual Cobol copybook. You want the ability to do search, and search, again, you have to go through the copybook, be able to pick out the right things and actually be able to work with search, which we're going to get a demo from Jorge a little later on. He's going to show some of the search capabilities we can do here. But you also want to have support for different file formats. We're going to show what the different file formats are a little bit, and we're actually going to sort of discuss why you have to have the ability to deal with all those different file formats, which is just another complexity. And there's a bunch of different things that are Cobol, things like redefines, fillers, and variable lengths. These are all problems that you have to deal with in order to actually work with the copybook in order to get the VSAM data and pull it out. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, SQL is a big deal. Most databases, when we access databases on a mainframe or just in general, whenever somebody else wants to access a mainframe, they use SQL to query it, to ask questions to it, to work with it. VSAM has no native SQL. So basically, there's not a good way to do it in the standard ways that different companies are used to doing it. I already mentioned earlier about regulatory challenges. One of the big ones is really the right to be forgotten. What does right to be forgotten mean? And it kind of came out of the EU, but it's in a number of different countries, and also different states in the U.S. are adding it. Right to be forgotten means if I make a request to a company, they have to forget me. and they have to actually find every record of me and delete all of them. Now, those could be in some digital assets. They may also be in some databases on the mainframe. They may also be in VSAM. I have to find all of those and pull them all together and actually be able to delete them. This is also useful not just for the right to be forgotten, also if you want to make changes to records and update somebody's address information. If it's kind of all over the place in different databases, it gets really hard to do. And it's a general problem, but it's been exacerbated by the regulatory groups that are actually working with it. But it's not just regulatory that's an issue here. We talked about supporting KICS migration paths. Now, people always say, I want to migrate my data and my business logic to actually off the mainframe to digital. And not everyone does this, but some people definitely want to do that. Well, how do you actually do that? You almost always support sort of a phased migration, but that's hard to do because the business logic has to be decoupled from the data. Why do I say that? Because if you're doing a phase migration, the same multiple different business logic may access the same data, and in doing so, if I don't decouple it, then what happens? I move one piece of business logic. I also move that data. Now the next piece of business logic is actually orphaned. There's no good way for it to access it, or else you have to rewrite something to make it be able to access something on the digital side. That gets to be a very hard problem to solve unless you decouple the business logic from the actual data and make it all work and make it work together. That way you can move some business logic over outside the mainframe, and then you can access the actual data that's on the mainframe, and eventually, as you get all the business logic that's needed moved over, then you can move the actual data all the way over. This is also the issue with ETLs. ETLs are fine in general. They really are. But the problem with them fundamentally is they don't handle everything. They don't handle necessarily if you want to leave your system of record to be the mainframe. And they don't really handle parsing. Their whole job is to move the whole database and move it over and do things. I mean, they handle a lot of complexity. They can do it really fast. But if you're moving business logic in phases in a phase migration type of approach, or if you don't want to move everything, you just want to look at the data, things get out of sync pretty quickly if you're not working with a system of record. So ETLs are a very useful tool, but they're a tool in your toolbox. You also want the ability to do it in other ways as well. Now I'll go a little deeper and actually discuss some solutions. In this case, I'm discussing the runtime architecture. And the beauty behind this runtime architecture is the fact that on the digital side, all you see is a microservice or function, and then it actually accesses the terminal. And the terminal talks to an adapter. That adapter is really just a simple KICS application, and using a URI map, it maps everything and then goes to the app. It then goes to the actual application areas, which then can contact the VSAM data or any other type of database. The beauty behind the solution is this works for VSAM, but it works just as well for other databases and even for business logic you call, because the whole idea is now you have a simple application running on the digital side that just knows how to do the access and access it through the standard ways, and then from there it connects all the way down through. Even if you want to connect through your screens, that's also possible. There are a number of different ways, and this works. And if you've seen any of our earlier webinars, I've shown a very similar picture for all the other webinars, because it's the same basic idea working, whether it's a microservice or a function. You just put that on the digital side and it connects directly in and communicates. That's the runtime. The interesting part about VSAM, because you see nothing really mentioned here about VSAM except for it being at the bottom of it, is actually as part of the design piece. And I'm going to hit the design component in the next couple slides. But first I want to discuss a little bit the process we go through for design. We discuss parsing legacy metadata. That in this case would be Cobol copybooks that hold the right information. And then we do generation of an SDK, and I'm going to discuss what an SDK is in a couple slides. And then we actually design the API that goes in as part of that. And then we do automatic test generation, because you have to have tests and you have to be able to work with tests and things. And then you want to do simplified deployment and runtime. You really want to think about how you simplify the whole process and make everything easy to work with. And that's the basic process we talk about. And we talk about this both for VSAM, for other databases, and also for exposing business logic, because that way you can stay within the same process and work everything depending upon what your needs are, and work on it very efficiently. So when I start discussing parsing, I promised earlier that I'd talk about the different types. And there's a number of different types of things you have to parse. You have to parse your key sequence data set, which is the most common one people see, and we're going to see in a demo a little later on. But you also want the ability to parse entry sequence data sets and relative record data sets and linear data sets. These are all different types of things we actually want to parse and work with, and that's a very important thing to think about. And the whole idea is you just take the copybook, you can bring it directly into an IDE and just parse that based on the information automatically and have it all just work correctly. Now I'm going to hand it over to George, who's going to discuss a little more how we worked with a partner to satisfy this for a customer. George?
Thank you, Marty. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so yes, this is a nice case, and I love talking about it because I was there when I saw this happen. It happens that Big ID, a partner of ours, they have a very strong solution for data analytics, and well, you may can dig later on about what they do. They were already having this customer. They were helping with some of the data analytics, but because of the California data protection law, they started struggling on how to extract the information from the mainframe, because it happened that this customer, very large insurance company, they had all the information into VSAM files. Particularly, they were using KSDS files. So they came to us, and we took about a couple of weeks to stand up everything, make the installations in their mainframes of our connector, and accessing the data, and putting together the APIs that they needed to do the extraction of the data. The nice part here is that we were able to deal with very, very complex data sets they have, because they also were using in the end variable length fields and redefines and fillers, and there was a lot of complexity. And despite of all that complexity, we were able to extract the information, and we were able to provide, in this case, Big ID, with the information that they needed to do their analytics. And it took us, basically the POC was 2 weeks, and well, taking that to production was a little longer because of the internal processes that this company has. But it was a very successful story. Marty.
Thank you very much. And we'll probably dive into Big ID. We're hoping to do it maybe on another webinar, but they actually use microservices, so it made the deployment a lot easier, because they actually used microservices, which we're going to discuss a little further on, so we could just deploy those directly into their system. They deployed those directly into their system because we could give them microservices. So it also worked really well for that process. But when we talk about VSAM, we think about VSAM analysis, which he just touched on a few minutes ago. VSAM has no native actionable logging on VSAM. They do have logging, but it's not actionable in the sense that you take actions the second things actually happen. But you can do this on the digital side if you bring the data up in pieces, and then you can see what changed and see what didn't change, and actually take action immediately and work with it, because there's a lot of actionable loggers that actually can work on that side. It'll take a little bit of time, for you to implement some things like that, but it's a very powerful tool in your toolbox, and a good option and a limitation that's in VSAM. Also, generally scanning data is tough, and our adapter has a search capability, and it's something that you need, and that's why SQL is called this, is used for querying, is for that exact reason. It's a common thing most people want to do in databases. And when we start talking about performing analytics, once you get that data and you start bringing it up, you start working with it, things like that, you could actually pull with only the deltas and just see what the differences are between things. So there's some power there in what you're actually doing, what you're actually working with, that allows you to do many, many different things on the digital side with the VSAM data, beyond just worrying about regulatory. Even though that was the impetus for why this large insurance company came to us and needed it with Big ID. So there's a lot of power there, and you have to be able to take advantage of that power. But when we go a little further, we also want to discuss a little bit about SDK generation. You generate the SDK, and the SDK actually can take multiple of each SDK, multiple entities inside of it, which can access to different databases. And then you can put those into one microservice, a couple different SDKs, and have them actually work together and do that. And so you can build sort of a nice coordinated system for what you need very easily. And the SDKs are generated automatically, so you don't have to worry about that part. And then we can do orchestration inside of them to make things all work. And there is templating and things like that, which makes it much easier for you to actually generate in anything you need for your code, for company standards, or if you have certain security requirements. We do include some basic security if you want to use it, things like OAuth 2, OLAP, and LDAP, and we use secure protocols to access it, HTTPS and TSL. So, and the language we use is Java, which is very strong typed. We also do have an option when we're not doing microservices to go to Node.js JavaScript, but in this case we're discussing the Java piece which goes into the microservice and works from there. And we'll discuss the API, which also becomes part of the microservice on the next slide. But one more thing to think about, which is important, is data masking. We only access the data we're pointing at there. So even if somebody somehow, if something happens in the microservice, they'd only get access to those specific pieces of data, not all the data inside the system. So when we talk about an API, you can define and generate an API. Now, we support a number of different ways to do this. We support both contract first, which means taking Swagger from an existing API and actually plugging it in and having it all and having it work, and then you just map that to the stuff that's coming out of the SDK and make everything work. Or we can generate an API for you, which is a very common thing for a lot of people. And this is very important to think about. Some of our partners, like Calibra, have an API, so we map to their API, whereas some we actually provide an API as part of what we're doing. And then we want to think about automatic test generation, because testing takes up a lot of time in development. It's very important too, and you want to automate that process as much as possible. Since I've been talking about Java, we use JUnit, and we automatically generate the JUnit. But we also have a JSON-based testing framework, which can take default input-output parameters, which actually then allow you to actually say, here's my inputs and here's the outputs that I expect, and you can then modify those. And you don't have to know Java to do that, because some testers sometimes don't know Java. And then we even have a Swagger front page, and what Swagger allows you to do is actually test the API directly. And these are all common, standard, open source ideas and tools which actually help you along the way for testing, and they're very common and people are used to using, which makes it really easy for the digital side to consume and use these things. And the last thing we want to think about is simplify deployment and runtime. We sort of mentioned this for Big ID earlier, but basically you can deploy anywhere with microservice architecture. It just makes it much easier if you have microservice, which you can just put into a container, typically Docker, and bind it with Docker, and you can put it either in a jar, or there are other ways to do it, and from there you can actually then just deploy it wherever you need to, whether it be on-premise or whether it be in the cloud. And it just simplifies the whole process and eases the deployment process. And at runtime, we give direct connections to speed access. It's direct connection to the system, and then direct connection to the VSAM in this case, make it all very easy to work with. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Jorge for a demo.
Thank you, Marty. Taking control of the screen. Let me know if you can see my screen now.
I can see your screen, and everyone can maximize it again with diagonal arrows. That'll be helpful.
Yes, please. Yeah, this is a very visual section, so please maximize your screen if you can with those arrows. So I'm going to give you a demo on how we do the access to the VSAM files. As you can see in the diagram, we are going to generate an SDK, then the API, and then I'm going to run and test these for you. And first, I'm going to start by showing you what is that we have in the mainframe. So I'm going to do, hopefully you can see my screen. This is the format of a green screen of the mainframe, and this is the sandbox that we have. What I'm going to do is navigate to the file systems and then just find the file that we're going to use for this demo. These files have some information about like 28 records, I think, and you can see that there's information about the first thing you have on the left side is the key, then name and address and things like that. It's a very simplistic use case. Just wanted to use this to show you how we extract information. But I'm going to leave that in the screen behind, just for us to be able to access that information, so you can see that this is exactly the data set that we're accessing. So the process to generate an API for OpenLegacy, it's about running wizards. And we've seen in the past in the series of webcasts, there's been a couple of times where we have created the entire process. So I'm going to generate the SDK for you into our IDE. What I need to do is just launch the wizard and put a name to the SDK. SDK, and then I just need to choose what connector I'm going to use. In this case, I'm going to use the connector to the gigs that is actually giving us access to the VSAM file. As I click next, I just need to put the credentials to access the sandbox that we have. It is very important to mention that these credentials are going to be immediately validated by Racket or whatever security you have inside of your on mainframe. So we're complying with the standards to make sure that the access to the URI map and the kick sports is going to be controlled by Racket. Okay, just making sure that we're okay. And as I click finish, this is going to create the entire structure of my SDK. You can see here, this is what I have. And as you remember, because of this file, what we did is we extract from the VSAM file the copybook that corresponds to this structure. And I'm going to show you that specific file. It's a basic copybook that has only this description, which is, as you saw, the record, last name, first name, and blah, okay? I'm going to use that to put it inside of my SDK. And I just need to drag it and drop it here, like this. Go inside of the source, and then main, and then resources, and then in the sample area. As I click OK, my copybook is already here. I just need to right-click and launch the next wizard, which is generate the model. Okay, I just need to put a name to my model. To make it very simple. I could be able to generate a JUnit from here. I'm not going to do it, but this JUnit could be taken to do whatever DevOps CI/CD strategy that you may have, and that's how we can actually get aligned already with the digital strategy. As I click OK, this is going to create the model. You saw that in a matter of, I don't know, seconds, created the description of my what's inside of my copybook, but it's been already converted to Java code, and this is basically the interpretation of that copybook. You can see that each one of the variables here, it's been converted in format, and it's been identified as a Java class that you can work with in the future. So let me go back to the diagram and show you what I did. It's basically generate the SDK and generate the model that corresponds to the VSAM file that I'm going to work with. I just went ahead and create before ahead of time the API, and I'm going to execute it right now. I did that because of two reasons. First is I want to focus a little bit more on showing you the results. And secondly, and it's because we've done this in the past, and you know how this works, but it's just launching basically another wizard, and you can put just the name. And from here, we can actually choose the option of deploying in microservices, which is what we did for Big ID, going back to that use case. We were deploying microservices as a Docker flavor, but we were able to actually do any other. So I launched the API, and in the background, it took control of my port 8080. So I'm going to go ahead and open a browser and then show the API running the port 8080. So what do we have here? We have basically two methods. We're able actually to create more methods. I'm just going to show you two methods. We can bring more records. We can actually do updates. But it's also going to depend a little bit on the way you make the access to the way you have your VSAM file. Let's say if you have variable lengths or things like that, doing the updates back to your VSAM file is gonna require some complexity that we also can take control of. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to extract one record, or let's say 5 records out of those 28 records. And I just need to put the object name, which is my VSAM file name. and I just need to say, okay, I want to bring 5 records from there. And as I click OK, you will see that this is bringing me the first 5 records from this person, Albert John, to this person, Everest Ivan. And if I go back to my file, this is exactly what we have from Albert John to record 5, which is Everest Ivan. So that's the way you can extract the data. And this is what we are providing in a microservice in a Docker flavor to BigID. Not only that, but as Marty was saying, it is also very important to go ahead and search information from the past, and in large bits of files, it is sometimes very difficult to do it from outside the mainframe. When we open the door for this large customer to be able to find specific records and then make a change, the search of the record is also a little bit, let's call this intelligent, because you have different types of descriptions of the data. In this case, you see you have the last name or you have the first name. So you can do the search based on whatever field you want to use. In this case, I'm going to use, for example, last name to find a specific record. And I'm going to say the field value I want it to be, let's search for Davidson. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to search for the field value Davidson. And if I execute this guy, it's going to go against the mainframe. Oh, I forget the file name. So this is the file name. As I execute this, this is going to go and find the data. So this is showing us the record key, which is the 40, and the last name, first name, and address, and all the information that corresponds to this specific person. As I said, I did the search based on the last name, but you could choose any other field to do the search based on, and that's basically the way this works. And I think that with that, I'm going back to you, Marty, please.
Thank you very much. Great job. I hope everyone enjoyed that demo. Now we're off to questions. So please, everyone, make sure to enter in some questions. We have a few here already, so we'll start up with those, and we'll go from there. So the first one is, do you need to have VSAM skills to use the OpenLegacy platform? And the answer is no. You don't need any VSAM skills to use it. You also don't need any Cobol skills. You have to have the Cobol file available, but once you have the right Cobol file, we take care of all the parsing of that and the generating of the Java code, and then all you have to do is know how to map a couple things, and that's about it. George, do you have any more comments on that?
Marty, it's not even the Cobol file. It's just a copybook.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
So the next question is, well, how can the solution help if we want to do phase migration? I sort of covered that early on, but someone might have joined a little later, and that's a very critical thing. In order to really do a phase migration, you have to think a little bit about how to decouple the actual data, the VSAM file, from the business logic, and that's a very critical thing to be able to do phase migration. And one of the things we allow you to do is leave the VSAM file on the mainframe and then actually work with it from and move the business logic as needed up. That's a choice you can make, or you could use the business logic to access it. So it's a very important thing to think about as you're trying to do a phase migration, which is very popular. And another question is, can you connect this to an existing API definition, which I mentioned is Swagger, and you can use different parts, and you actually can build it using your actual existing APIs, and we've done that with some partners already, and a lot of our customers typically do it that way as well. They use existing APIs, they map them directly to what we're doing, and it's no different whether we're doing it to business logic, we're doing it to screens, we're doing it to VSAM files. It's all kind of the same idea. You can always do that. I think we answered all of the questions. So what I'm going to say to you now is, feel free to look at www.openlegacy.com/mainframe to take a deeper look at what we do. And thank you for attending our our webinar about digital-driven integration for core systems. We have another webinar coming up in a couple weeks about a 360-degree view and how to work with multiple different types of core files, which should be very interesting for everyone to attend, or feel free to look at some of our recorded webinars we've already had. Thank you very much, and thank you for attending.